think it's been fascinating, and as Polly said, there's just so much different types and aspects of data that we've seen, from more static to dynamic to the social data and how they all come together. I'd really like to come to Clive actually to hear his perspective on what he's heard today and on what that might mean for Wales.
Well, certainly from a sort of small town mayor of a population of 4,000, I thought all three speakers are excellent. It's another level to what we're doing, with what Ed said with the data that he has. What we did in a simplistic way was create something called a place plan. And we just used the data from the system we have to generate the spatial information that we know what we needed to spend on budget and policy. And then we've got 3 linked communities to the main urban part of Cardigan. We've got 3 villages on the outskirts. And so at the moment we're doing like what they call active travel for those that are from Wales, looking at active travel inquiries and engagement to see what's needed in terms of the links between the towns. But the data we don't have is how many people use buses and things like that. We don't have that information about what kind of pattern there is between the villages and the time of day and things like that. So, this sort of stuff is really fascinating in terms of that sort of thing. And then with what Sharon presented, very similar stuff to what we're doing, but again at another level. We have a single active area, which is the town. But I'd love to be able to break it down to look at the heritage element of the town to see how much that attracts new visits to compare to the shopping area, and also to the more sort of suburban part of the town. For example, in just a key point from my point of view is that at the moment we spent about 50 to 100,000 on redeveloping play areas in the town, and I'm just finishing off a second project now, and I'm only basing it on footfall, so I don't know the kind of demographics and frequency of use and things like that, so I don't know enough about that. But hopefully, and being able to get more information on how we do that would be able to influence how we do policy and budgets in the town. But it's great to see the level of information that is possible. We use dwell time and footfall, and we can see the patterns and the tourists when they come in and when they go, and so we base our decisions on that. So, and on that, by the way, what we do, by the way, in case you didn't know, we send out information to all the businesses. There's 120 shops in Cardigan, and they all get information every month, which has translated this data into footfall and frequency, dwell time, how many people are coming into town, how often they're staying there, and things like that. So it's fascinating that this level of information. And then with what Polly had then, wow. And you're probably right about the 28%. I think that's true here from a local perspective, and probably other parts of Wales. I saw one clothing shop suddenly become much more active social media wise, and she started doing a fashion show on Instagram and online, and she's now been on TV twice as a result of doing that. And so it's brilliant that they've now grasped the nettle of, being frightened of the internet. I think it's going to be a competitor to the high street, but instead they've embraced it and said it's just another channel to market for them. And what I'm excited about in the year ahead, in terms of the context of the town, is that so much more is happening online, that now becoming more aware about Instagram and Facebook and things like that, and they're doing much more click and collect going on at the moment, something that didn't happen 2 years ago or even last year before COVID. So this accelerated that sort of channel to market and the online side for the town, definitely. And I'm quite excited that then would be a draw to the town. I think you mentioned, one of the speakers mentioned that there are people who are quite good on social media and then attracting people into the town, and there's a secondary spend happening there because they've attracted those people into the town. So yeah, really, really good and fascinating. I've learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Great, yeah. And actually, I just wanted to come back to a couple of the questions that we've got. So one of them that's been posed is around coming back to actually what Ed was saying about using that spatial analysis for certain purposes. And the attendee says, you know, the Welsh Government is also interested in 30% of people working from home within their communities and remote working hubs. And presumably this tool could be used to suggest where these hubs could be located to have maximum impact. So I think that's a really interesting thing to discuss around you know, is work a missing component of the high street, and actually strategically where should you site those hubs to be very complementary?
Yes, definitely. In the context of where we are here, I think that.
Oh, we lost Clive. Okay.
I've gone on mute. Clive, you've gone on mute for some reason.
Yep.
There we go. Sorry. Hello. Yeah. Let me just get rid of that. Yeah. In the context of where we are, you're right. Looking at footfall and things like that, generally, you know, near the town centre would be ideal for our situation, remote working, or within 2 or 3 miles, you know, if we can avoid using the car. So again, the link communities in Cardigan are all within 2 or 3 miles from the town centre. We've got this green space around the town, but there are these commuting villages that we have. There's 3 of them. So I'd happily cycle into Cardigan to the hub just to have some social life, you know, be able to mix and share a photocopier. So that would be ideal, really, and the bus routes. Then this information that Ed is providing would be ideal for what we're looking for, definitely.
Yeah, and Ed, I don't know whether you want to comment on that. I know when we had the briefing call, it was one of those things that we discussed, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that we had been thinking about during lockdown was, yeah, some people are able to work from home and it's okay, but not everybody can. Some people will have to go back to work. But the big questions, I mean, if you look at a big city like London, it's where is then the risk of people coming to contact? It's places like public transport. So how do you work with a reduced capacity? How do you still allow people to get to work when they really have to? How do you kind of reserve or protect public transport for people that have no other option? Because you can get people to walk and cycle, and that's fine if you can walk or cycle, but if you can't, then you're stuck as well. What we looked at was, where were there naturally parts in cities which were easy to get to by public transport, but also by active transport. And if you get this, I mean, the idea was that you might live on the edge of a city, you might need to get a train in a certain distance, and then when you're close enough to the centre, you could cycle the last 2 kilometres or 5 kilometres. And so there are strategic points in cities that you can find where the public transport network happens to intersect with a bit of the street network, which is more walkable. And that transfer from one mode to another can be an opportunity. You might get people transferring and keeping on moving into the centre, but you also might get people staying there. If you look at London, those places tend to be local high streets. One of the really interesting things is would be to think about, could you start to make small scale shared workspaces in those hubs? And there's then going to be a kind of a longer term question, which is what then is the kind of future role of high streets? And for a long time, they have been quite focused on retail. But if they're the parts of the city that people, or parts of towns and places that people naturally walk through on their way to someone else, they're really places that encourage social interaction. And it's just that retail uses have really exploited there being people there to be able to have shops and sell things to. So I think there's a really interesting long-term question about what's the future of high streets. As retail, some of it does shift online, what then happens to those spaces which are left? Do they become more social? Is it about a different kind of work? Is it about a new mix of part working from home, part working around other people? And I mean, one of the things that COVID has made really clear is just the benefit of being in the same room at the same time as other people. And that's really, really difficult to, for a whole series of different types of kind of creative tasks. It's just really, really difficult. So I think there's an interesting question about how do all those things come together, and how do we look at high streets in the longer term as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks very much for that, Ed. And then just going to another question, which actually I think goes on to what Sharon was talking about as well, was what city or town data do you wish existed that would help your model? And Sharon talked about, you know, that thinking about the data that's missing. And actually, to any of the panelists, you know, what data would you like to see that would really enhance these models?
I could speak up first if you like. My interest is ultimately in mobile data and sense data sources, and looking at ways we can build models from them. But I just think in terms of driving policy decisions, we need to be aware that they don't give us everything. So there's a real push at the moment for big computational models of massive amounts of quantitative data. But actually, it's still worth investing some time at getting into that qualitative data and the more traditional means of acquiring it, whether it's through surveys, through people on the ground, asking people, getting to the people that maybe aren't being captured when you are sensing effectively somebody carrying a mobile device in their pocket and it being picked up by sensors around the town, or because they've installed an app that will share readings so that you can start to do some kind of spatial analysis. We know that's skewed heavily towards younger people and towards professional people. So it's good for generalizations and it's good for targeting services that also they need, but that doesn't make an entire town. So we need to still think that there's probably going to be a number of traditional means to acquire data for other groups that aren't as well represented. And unfortunately, that does mean that it's generally the challenge is it's more expensive to get that data. We can install an app and then we can generate millions and pounds, millions of records and analyze it very, very cheaply. Whereas to actually have researchers on the ground, that are qualified to be able to have the kinds of conversations to get those insights becomes a lot more expensive. The benefit, though, of the mobile data is it can help drive the questions, in terms of you can start to learn the footfall and the dwell spots and the areas that are being used or the areas that are not being as used as you expected to. And that can then help frame the sorts of questions you want to ask at a more qualitative level. So you can actually lead to better quality surveys as a result, rather than starting off with going, what questions should we ask? So use that mobile data to help structure a better survey. But certainly from policy decision making, do still consider there's going to probably still be some more qualitative approaches needed.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, to be very inclusive about where we're getting the data and who we're getting the data from. I think is an important point. I'm very conscious of time. I think there's just one last question that I'd like to pose the social data to Polly, and it was a question about the 72% of businesses not on social. What are the reasons do we think in Wales is for that? And perhaps between Polly and Clive, you might be able to start to answer this. Is it lack of poor poor connectivity, or is it other things? Certainly we've touched on the skills aspect there. So Polly, I don't know in general whether you want to talk about that, and maybe Clive specifically.
Yeah, great question. Look, I think it's as individuals, we're all happy using social media. We use it to a greater or lesser extents. But suddenly, when you're talking as a business, people, it's almost like sort of 30 years ago when only a few people in a business had a phone. It's given to one person in an organisation, or it's given to an agency, and actually, it's a very personal thing. And businesses have to become social. It's not something you just outsource. So it is genuinely a skills gap of people just not understanding how to sell using this channel. And consumers have run off the pitch of the ball. They're now living in this environment that businesses have not really entered. And the longer they're not in it, the bigger the perceived barrier is. So the key thing that we do, and the reason we work with High Street Task Force, is that by collecting all that data, we say to people, look, it's not actually about what you post, it's about how you respond. So, life's a conversation, right? And social media is just a place to have a conversation. So we believe that by being able to aggregate data together, show towns what they look like, and somebody goes, well, I'm not there, and you go, well, no, you're not there because you're not part of the conversation. And if you don't want to post something today, well, just join the other conversations, join the conversation the restaurant's having, and make it more matter of fact, because social media is not about what you say, it's about how you engage. And it's a skill that businesses need to learn at scale.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I don't think it's infrastructure. People think, it's the broadband and all that. You don't need that kind of bandwidth, and we've got it now in Wales, I think. It is skills. I'll give you an example. Over Christmas, I did a campaign where I promoted all the online shops that were available in Cardigan, and I got bombarded then by people saying, well, my shop's not on there, but I said, well, you haven't got a shop. You've got a Facebook page, but you're just saying what your sister did and things like that. It wasn't a business-focused Facebook page. And so suddenly they realize I'm not there in the context of my business, and they sort of sharpened up a little bit then. And so that added sort of to that sort of channel to market then in the town. So yeah, I think it is a skills gap. I know there's Superfast Business Wales are sort of trying to fill that gap with what they're doing. And also before many years, something called Opportunity Wales, which helps the whole e-commerce agenda improve in Wales as well. So yeah, I think it's down to skills.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. We have quite a few more questions, and we'll aim to get those answered for you. But for now, I'm going to hand back to David. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Linda. And yes, so just to reiterate, we will respond to all the questions and throughout the whole Masterclass series and circulate them. Also, we'll be providing all the talks online, so we're separating them into individual talks as well, so you could listen to individuals as well. So our next webinar is on February the 11th, and it's titled The Internet of Things and Data for a Smarter Town. And we'll be posting something on that very shortly. So to finish off, I'd like to thank Ed, Sharon, Polly and Linda for their talks. It's been a fascinating, a lot to take in and process and see how we can apply it to Wales. So that's the task ahead of us. Also for our supporting cast, we have Sarah from the Hub sitting quite far away from me. We have Peter, Derlyn, Matt from Welsh Government who have been supportive throughout. So, and on that, it's a bit hackneyed, but stay safe, and we'll see you in a month or so. Diolch yn fawr iawn.